for men, because a lot of times we're taught to be stoic, keep our feelings on the inside, don't tell anybody what's going on because everybody's looking at you. But like you said, when I find that especially with my girlfriend, when I'm just truthful with her how I'm feeling, sometimes the shit may hit the fan, but it gives us we can operate in truth together, in honesty, and that I find doing that, being just, hey, this is what's happening.
And when you do that, the other person feels like they can open up too,
exactly.
right? It creates trust.
Yep.
And we all taught when we were young, right? You've heard this yourself when you were young. Boys don't cry.
Yeah.
You got to be a man. Grab your balls, be a man, or whatever. That kind of all those phrases, right?
Yeah, don't cry. I'll give you something to cry for.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
God, I heard that one.
I remember I spoke. I was invited to speak at the Ministry of Defence in Manchester, England, and it was all military men, and there was a lot of brass in the room, and a lot of officers, and the conference was was military themed, obviously, and they asked me to come in and speak about my experiences, and I remember a lot of them afterwards. They said, "Wow, it's the first time somebody's ever been so open about their experience." And I said, well, that's the only way, really, right? That's how we're going to help these people. That's how we're going to help these guys, because every single day, throughout the day, it's 22 seconds apparently that a veteran takes their own life, and those are just veterans, So, and men, the suicide for men has gone up over the last 20 months since lockdown. There's a lot of men have lost their income. And when a man, and a lot of men's identity is tied very, very, very tied
Provider.
into their money.
Yep.
How much money they make.
Right.
If they can't make money,
Then who?
they don't know who they really are. Their identity is taken away, and now they think I can't feed my family. There's no point in living.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's why this work is important.
Absolutely.
Music, vitally important.
Absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about yourself. One thing I heard about is that you were in the Angola Wars.
Yes.
So tell me a little about that. That sounds very fascinating.
Okay, cool. Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. I appreciate the time. I appreciate being here. It's always good to talk about my past because I find it does help people. And like you said, I have been in. I experienced the Angolan War as a soldier for South Africa. I grew up in Durban, in a place on the east coast of South Africa, and when I was a young kid, I didn't ever expect that I would be going to war, but I ended up going to the military. I had to go to the military. It was compulsory at that time. It was conscription, and so all the men in my family went to the military. My father, my grandfathers, my cousins, my uncles, and it was my turn. And conscription meant that every male had to go to the military unless you went to university. Then you could sidestep the military for the period of your degree, and then if conscription was still in place after your degree, then you would come back into the military, having done your degree or having served or having studied at university. I didn't have the marks to go into school. I wasn't academic into university. I was just scraped through school, so I went straight into the military and 2 years training, and my first year of training was, basic training, and I was trained to use a patrol mortar pipe and an RPG-7 rocket launcher, and it was good fun practicing with those things on in mock combat, etc. As I'm sure that all males like to, play around with those types of things if you just having fun with it in a mock operation. However, you didn't expect to ever use something like that in real life against somebody else, and that's exactly what happened in 1987 when South Africa was asked to go back into Angola. We had been in Angola for a long time, covertly. We weren't supposed to be there. We had, according to the Geneva Convention, in fact, I had to sign a document saying that I wouldn't ever talk about what had happened up there and what I was about to experience for the rest of my life. And signing that document was quite, daunting when you consider you're signing something that says that you can never talk about this again. And that kind of, gave you some kind of idea. Well, we started thinking all kinds of things about what we were about to experience, and then we were in a convoy for 18-mile long convoy that went for 3 or 4 days, and we got into Angola, and then for the first 2 weeks, all we did was play cat and mouse with the enemy, and then we ran into the enemy one day, and we ran into 4 Russian T-55 tanks, and it was pretty intense. And and then for several months after that, we encountered the enemy every other day, and we were being bombed by MiG-27s. We were fighting against Russians and Cubans, and that war had been raging for many, many years. 25 plus years. Millions of people had lost their lives there. It was known as the bloodiest war of Africa. And so after several months being up there, we were flown directly out of there and into a rehabilitation camp, and for 2 weeks, and we had fresh socks, fresh underpants. That's all I really remember about that rehabilitation camp. We spoke to psychologists, but I don't really remember that. And then I was at home 2 weeks later, and then I was then had to try and process what I'd seen and done. That was pretty intense, because the very first combat we went into, I lost one of my friends, who was bleeding out right in front of me. I had to give him a blood transfusion. And then I was dropping mortars, 60mm mortars and RPG-7 rockets, into enemy vehicles, etc. That was. Then you try and process that, when you're in your bedroom at home, 21 years of age, it's very quiet, except your head's very noisy. Mm-hmm. And I began to drink, etc. And I was already smoking marijuana from the age of 14, and then I was drinking excessively and drank myself to sleep just about every day for 6 months. And then I bumped into somebody, and then my life turned a corner. It was, that day I bumped into a friend of mine. He introduced me to personal development. He introduced me to the book Think and Grow Rich. Mm-hmm. And then everything changed from there, yeah. Or it began to change, I should say.
And so what age were you when you got introduced to personal development?
21.
Wow.
Yeah. I was 8 months into my 21st year. Yeah, I turned 21 14 days after I came home from the military. Okay. And then 8 months later, it was July, so 7 months, let's say. 7 months later, I was introduced to Think and Grow Rich. Okay. And then that put me on a different path, and I began to read excessively, and just began to absorb knowledge like a sponge, really. I was fascinated by the whole world of psychology, and the whole world of the mind. I'd never heard anything about that before. Yeah. I was a kid who, struggled really as a youngster. I was bullied a lot. I was had very low self-esteem. My father was very popular and gregarious and a big guy, 6'4", and the chairman of a golf club, etc. So he had a lot of friends, and I was intimidated by the fact that he was so popular and such a big man, also very strict and a disciplinarian, and even before I got to the military, I grew up next to a police station, for the first 6 years of my life, and I was born in '66, and that was during the height of South Africa's apartheid years, and so I'd already had all kinds of limiting beliefs, that had begun to take place in the back of my mind, about myself, about life, about other people. And luckily, my parents were liberal, and they brought me up and they said, always respect people by their character and not the color of their skin. This is a very interesting place we're living in, and but still, when you grow up in that kind of environment, you indoctrinated whether you know it or not. It's only when I came to live in England, many years later, when I was 23, and I arrived in London, and I looked at South Africa from England, I could see, I could understand then what people were talking about,
So what was it about Think and Grow Rich? Was it the content of the book, or just getting you on the path of just reading and getting out of...
It was, the content was, from the moment I started reading that book, I was fascinated. The content just grabbed me. And also while I was reading that book, I discovered I had a very good memory, like a photographic memory. I could remember quotes and pages and chapters. But what really grabbed me in that book was, there's 2 phrases in that book that grabbed me. The first one is quite famous for anybody who's read that book. Anybody who's read Think and Grow Rich they'll tell you that phrase or that sentence, whatever the mind can conceive and believe it can achieve. That's a famous sentence that comes out of that book. And people have spoken about that sentence, for years and years and years. However, the other sentence that really grabbed me was, every adversity has within it the seed of an equivalent or greater benefit. And when I read that for the first time at 21 years of age, 7 months out of the military,
you've been through a lot of adversity.
Having lost a lot of buddies, and I was full of guilt and shame, and plus I went to 2 Catholic schools. It was we had religious dogma shoved into I had religious dogma shoved into my head since the age of 4. And so, when I read that sentence, my brain said, BS, I've just come out of this, war-torn Angola, seeing things that, nobody should ever have to really see, and do things that, nobody should ever really know about. And so I wrote that sentence down, and I put it on the wall, and I contemplated that every day, What does that actually mean, Every adversity has within it the seed of an equivalent or greater benefit. And now, many years later, I can say with hand on my heart and absolute conviction, everything always has a blessing. There's a blessing in everything.
Yeah.
There's
100%
always a
agree.
blessing in everything. I don't care what anybody says.
Yeah.
It's just, that's a conviction for me.
Yeah.
Because I've had too many experiences where you think, wow,
Yeah.
and there has been a blessing further down the road. And people say, well, how can that be a blessing? And then, I was in 30 years later, 2017, I was doing a 12-city tour of Russia. And I was on 12 cities, going to 12 cities in Russia. Every weekend I was doing 2 cities.
Yeah.
And I went to 3 different cities where 3 different men came up to me and said, I was in Angola in '87 fighting against you. And thank you for coming here. Thank you for being here. And thank you for telling your story so transparently and so being so vulnerable about, what happened during, after that experience. Because I realized, and 2 of them were still in the military, and all 3 of them said something very similar. They said, I've kept my family at a distance, and I realized, what that's created in me, the walls I've put up as a result of that experience, or those experiences in the military. So, I just thought, wow, when that happened the first time, I was blown away. That happened 3 times. I thought, wow, that's crazy, right? The universe has got a sense of humor. 30 years later.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way.
Yeah. So,
Einstein says there's 2 ways to live life. Nothing's a miracle or everything's a miracle. I prefer the second.
absolutely.
Yep. And but we're coaches also, so no matter what type of adversity somebody has inside them, if we can work and find it, there's always a blessing inside all of that.
100%.
And the greater the trauma, the bigger the blessing.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
100%.
It's always difficult to see it while you're in the midst of it.
Yeah.
But it's always, but when you look back, everybody can look back. I think, you would agree, right? If you take anybody and you say, listen, just look back at your life 10 years from now and think about the toughest time you're going through at that time. Or think about the toughest time you've been through in your life. Had that not happened, you probably wouldn't be where you are now.
Yep.
And when people say, oh, yeah, that's true.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's that folding of the steel, sharper and stronger edge, man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Spiritual fortitude, spiritual warrior.
Yeah.
Which is, that's important, man.
Yeah, I think I was really lucky and blessed to be able to find my way to personal development. And that in itself was I see it as a divine inspiration. That particular because I bumped into my friend in the street, and I hadn't seen him for a long time, and we had been friends, not really close friends when we were kids, and we started talking. He said, "Where have you been?" I said, "I'm in the military." He said, "Me too. Where were you?" And I said, "I've been all over." I didn't want to say where I'd actually been. And he said, "Man, I've been in Angola I've been flying into Angola in a chopper and taking the wounded back to the military hospital." And I said, "Yeah, I was on the front line." He said, "Well, come to my place." We went up to his place, and he had all these books, and we started talking. We were both 21. He was very emotionally mature. I mean, he was, leaps and bounds ahead of me in terms of just understanding himself, and he's the one who said, "Hey, you should start reading." And then he picked up Think and Grow Rich, and he said, "Start with this one." And then he had all these books, and I read, Mind Power after that, John Kehoe, and then You Can Heal Your Life, Louise Hay. Those were the first 3 books I read. And then I started reading, Jim Rohn and John Maxwell, and so yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I can't believe it's like now 2022 around the corner.
Yeah.
It's been a long way.
Yep.
I'm still reading.
Yeah.
I still like reading.
Me too.
Yeah.
The director, he mentioned that you spiritual warrior. What is that about?
One of my team said we were looking at domains, and one of my team said, "What about spiritual soldier?" And so
soldier.
so we bought that domain, but I've never really used that. People ask me all the time, "What is spiritual psychology about? What is a spiritual soldier?" And I think we all, to some degree, all men to some degree are soldiers, and we have to be soldiers at some time in our life. And when you look at the 4 archetypes, one of them is a warrior, You know, so we have a warrior, a lover, a magician, and a king.
Okay.
And there's different names for those things, you know, Jung's archetypes. However, the warrior is somebody who takes action. We all have to be that at some point in our life. However, you know, spiritual psychology is something that's changed my life so much in the last 20 years. In 1999, I was in Hawaii, and I had this amazing experience with this turtle, and it literally was a confirmation for me. I just said a prayer only moments before, invoking the spirits of the soldiers that I'd killed in Angola so many years before to come and bless me so that I could take my own forgiveness to the next level. Because I realized, you know, I was at that stage 2 months sober after 18 years of drinking and drug abuse constantly. And 2 months sober in Hawaii, in this beautiful place, on this beautiful program that was, you know, I was, you know, felt like I was in heaven. And however, I knew that I was also had these constructs, these mental constructs that I still needed to dissolve. And one of them was obviously forgiving myself. And so I found myself sitting next to this waterfall, and then I just began to talk openly to God for the first time in a long time. And for me, by that stage, I had changed my concept of what God was. You know, I had studied religion for several years as soon as I started to study personal development. Because I was interested in what that was, and I'd been to 2 Catholic schools, and I had a lot of that stuff shoved into my head, and I didn't agree with a lot of it. And then, you know, I found myself sitting in this beautiful paradise, and I began to talk out loud, you know, say, hey God, so, you know, it's a long time since we spoke, and, you know, and I'm in this beautiful place, and I'm 2 months sober, and I'm ready, life is changing so fast for me right now, and, you know, everything I've read over the years is, you know, kind of like manifesting, and, you know, and I said, I realized, you know, I still have this challenge with forgiving myself. So I said, I'd like to invoke these spirits of these soldiers to come and bless me. And at that moment, the whole place started to vibrate really, and the colors got sharper. My senses got sharper, right? And the colors got brighter. And I was sitting next to this lagoon. It's a man-made lagoon. It's beautiful, right? The waterfall, and the hotel was in the distance, and everything is man-made there because it's a volcanic island. And it felt like someone wrapped a blanket of love around me, and I began to cry with mixed emotions, you know, grief and relief and gratitude. And as that happened, the surface of the water, just 3 feet below me, the surface of this lagoon broke, and this turtle popped out. This head of this turtle popped up and looked straight at me for about 5 seconds. We just looked at each other, took a breath of air, and then disappeared under the water. And then I just took that as a confirmation, you know, that my prayer had been heard. And it was the next day I got a chance to share that experience in front of the whole room. And it was after that a man came up to me, and you know, you talk about synchronicities, right? And this man came up to me, he said, have you heard of Neil Donald Walsh? I said, no, I haven't. So he said, hey, he's written this amazing trilogy of books, Conversation with God, and my message is you should read these books. So I said, thank you. And so on the way back from Hawaii, you know, about 10 days later, on the way back to London where I was living, where I have been living on and off for 30 years, I found these books in LAX airport. And I read them. I began to read them on the way back on the plane, and I read them, you know, all 3 of them, and then I read the first one again, and then I read a few others that he had written after that, and you know, since then I've been telling everybody they should read that book, you know, Conversation with God, book 1, at least book 1. And I've told people all around the world, you know, I've spoken right across Europe, Eastern Europe, America, Africa, up and down the UK, and it's amazing, you know, I get messages many, many months later saying, hey, I finally read that book, and thank you, it's really like changed things for me. And that was the beginning. I tell you that story because that was the beginning for me into spiritual psychology, where I really began to, you know, I'd been asking myself for a long time, who am I? And what is my place in life? And what is life really about? But I began to ask that question and began to get better answers, I think, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the quote, Einstein, the questions?
2 ways to live life, either nothing's a miracle or everything's a miracle.
And there was if you had a gun to your head, what was that one? Einstein had a gun to him and said an hour to figure out.
Said if somebody gave him a problem to solve and said, hey, I'm going to kill you after an hour, within an hour, if you don't solve this problem, he said he would come up with spend the first 15 minutes to come up with the correct question to ask himself, and the last 10 minutes to solve the issue. So, you know, the question, what we put in our head is so important, you know, Why am I such a screw up? And we get plenty of answers to that question. When we get the answers to that type of question, people hate it and they call it overwhelm. But it's the same. We're asking the universe. The universe is providing those answers to that question. So ask something that you actually choose to get an answer to.
Absolutely.
What does my life look like now that I'm living my purpose? What's new and different for me? What's my family look like? Ask those questions, and then we get the answers to that. Those are ahas, but we're getting ahas even if we hate them.
Absolutely, so true. Yeah, it reminds me of that book by Allan Kleynhans, Questions Are the Answer. It's such a good book, and the first time I ever came across that concept of asking better questions was with Tony, when I was sitting in a room with Tony Robbins, and I was 32 years of age. And he said, if you want a better quality of life, you've got to ask much better quality of question. And I thought, wow, that's so true, right? Because I was always asking myself, what's wrong with me? And I had a specific way of saying it with an expletive in the middle there. What the beep is wrong with me?
Oh, you go ahead, rip it.
And I'd say that with a tonality,
Yep.
What the beep is wrong with me?
Yep. And here comes a whole bunch of answers to that
Exactly.
question.
Oh, I got you, bro.
And then I'd follow that up with, I'm such an idiot.
Yeah.
And I wasn't even aware of that. I wasn't even conscious about that until we had that conversation. I thought, wow, that's so true. And he said, what do you ask yourself all the time? What's your primary question? I said, that's easy. What the beep is wrong with me?
Right.
Yeah.
I've had plenty of those questions, man. So you do a lot of coaching, a lot of speaking. So what are you getting from the people that you're coaching? What are you hearing? Basically, what's the word on the street?
Yeah, it's it's an interesting time we're living in right now, especially what's happened over the last 20 months. But even before that, I think if I give a little bit of background, when I first began to read about personal development, then I became fascinated by it. And then when I went to my very first workshop, it was a sales workshop because my first job was a sales job. But even at that training, they were talking about mindset and your mental approach. And I was fascinated by that. And I thought, wow, I just loved that. And so when I went to Landmark for the first time, I did a Landmark Forum in London in 1994. It was within 5 minutes that the forum leader arrived on the stage, and I thought, wow, I want to do what this guy does. I'd love to do this. And over the next 3 days, I got so much value out of that program. I just thought, wow, this is what I want to do with my time. I want to go to these programs. I want to start, because I was driven by this concept that there was something wrong with me, and I need to fix myself. I need to find out what was wrong. And I had that feeling ever since I was a kid. I was always, left out. I was always on the sidelines. But when I started going to all these workshops, and especially when I started to study spiritual psychology, and I began to ask myself, like, who am I really? And I began to really go read about that. And then I was having these own, when you have these epiphanies about yourself, and you have these, and I started to meditate, and then that started to open up a lot of things inside of me, and I started getting these answers from a higher place. And then I started to ask myself, what is it that people are really struggling with? And for me, it was obvious, and because I had struggled with that my whole life, and that was a lack of identity and a lack of certainty about who you really were. And so I thought, well, when people come to a workshop, including myself, what they're looking for is they're looking for a reassurance or some kind of guarantee that life is going to be okay tomorrow, next month, next week, next year, whenever, right? Like, that's what they're really saying, right? Please, to the person on the stage, please give me a guarantee that my life's going to be okay. And the more that my own identity developed and the more my own confidence grew, the more I realized that had to come from inside. You couldn't get that from anyone else. It has to be an internal focus of control, right? And so when I began to really read deeply about spiritual psychology, and I began to ask myself, okay, cool, what do I really believe? And I thought, well, we're three-part human, okay? So we're mind, body, and energy, or mind, body, and spirit. The word spirit sometimes freaks people out or makes them, kind of triggers them. So mind, body, and energy. And nobody can argue with the fact that when you study quantum physics, everything has been proved to the fact that everything is energy moving at speed. This table is moving at speed. That's why it's solid. It's moving at such a fast speed. And so I began to ask myself, what is missing in workshops that I would like to include? And so considering that most people have a lack of identity, I wanted to bring that in and bring more of the spiritual understanding that I was happening into my own workshop. And so I find even now, what people are missing now is like, who am I? Like they don't know, they don't really know who they are because they've been given this fictional identity when they were young. This is your name, this is where you live, this is your nationality, this is your race, your creed, your religion, etc. And then they get taught to defend that. And they defend that to the point of death, a lot of people.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's fictional. It's
Yeah.
made up. It's not real. So when people come to my workshops and when I coach people, I really, at first they might come for business, or, I coach on 5 main key areas, their business, their finance, their personal development, their health, and their relationships. They might come for one of those things, but eventually it's going to get down to the deeper aspect of who are you really? Why are you here? Because there's no accidents, and we've all been born at a specific time. And I was talking about this with the director, Michael, at dinner the other night. We're talking about we've been born at this time now,
Right.
And this is not the first time we've been here,
Going back to energy,
and what's happening in the world right now, and it's just another vehicle for all of us to say, okay, how do I want to individually evolve, and how can we collectively evolve? And so, the biggest challenges that I get from people is a lack of certainty, a lack of certainty about who they are, a lack of self-assurance, because when you know who you are, it doesn't really matter what's happening around you.
Right.
When you know that you're connected, when you know that you're guided by a higher power. I'm not into religion, but I'm deeply into connection, because I think that everything is connected. It's energetic.
Right.
Einstein spoke about that. Einstein spoke about the magic of this universe, but he spoke about it from a mathematician's point of view.
Yeah, frequency.
Yeah,
Tesla too.
absolutely.
Yep.
And Tesla said exactly that. He said one man's, I can't remember the quote exactly, but one man's God is another man's frequency or something like that.
Okay.
So, people, I find that no matter how successful they are, often the most successful people are still lacking a sense of who they really are, which is why they're still looking for the next thing all the time.
Right. Because
Chasing like the donkey chasing the carrot. Like, when I get this, I'll finally be happy. When I get this, I'll finally be happy. They're still living life. They're still living life in reverse.
Absolutely.
It's got to come from here.
Yeah.
Then you have the self-satisfaction.
Yeah.
But nothing out there will ever do it. And that's what I believe what's going on in the world right now too. Is there's people who are waking up and they realize all that comes from inside themselves. But there are also people that believe, once I get this, then I'll be happy. Once this person takes care of me to the level that I feel entitled to, then I'll be happy. But that entitlement thing never works.
Yeah.
It's always going to be, what I see is everyone is born with this beautiful gift called co-creation. Most people don't have a clue they have it, much less how to use it. And once they understand how they use this gift of co-creation, that's the only where real self-fulfillment comes into place.
Yes.
And I saw a really interesting video on YouTube or something one day, and they said the levels of pleasure we can have in life. They said sex was like an 8 out of 10, psychedelics was a 9 out of 10, and they said the only thing more pleasurable for that in a human is the conscious use of our co-creative gift. And I read that, I was like, yeah, that's true. I mean, all those other things are fleeting and based on outside stimulus,
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That sense of it's that sense of bliss, that inner bliss, isn't it? When you have that true fulfillment, nothing can replace that.
Yep. And then that truth, like you don't argue over the truth. Like you were talking about people being at war, they argue over belief systems for millennia, right?
Yes.
And kill each other over a belief system. But once you have truth, it's like 2 + 2 is 4. You may believe 2 + 2 is 4,987. That's good for you. I got 4. See you, buddy. And walk away,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's absolutely true.
Yeah.
I agree with that. We talk about the last 20 months and the whole lockdown, and when you talk about, you just said something about the external stimuluses that people have been placing so much emphasis on and importance on to feel good about their lives, and then a lot of that was taken away.
Yep.
You couldn't go to the gym, you couldn't see your friends and family. You just
Yep.
had to be inside.
Right.
And that was interesting for a lot of people, because then you had to sit with yourself. And a lot of people have never done that before.
No.
For longer than a couple of minutes before they think, okay, let me put the TV on, or let me go and eat something, let me do something.
And after a while, it gets old. You
watch
have
the
to
news
actually
and
be forced to sit with
that's
yourself.
going to poison you. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Going back to what you were saying, fulfillment, trying to find all these fulfillments. In my life, like I've done a lot of studying, self-growth or whatever, but what I find with myself sometimes, going back to your identity, I have all this information and knowledge, but the courage to step out and speak. do you find that with a lot of men and like successful people because of they have all this knowledge and all this spiritual knowledge, but it's the identity part. They don't know themselves, and so they keep that information inside.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very true. A lot of people, this finding your voice is such a powerful thing. And a lot of people, they struggle with that.
Yeah. And how did you go about doing that? Because you speak all over the world. Like, how did you go about having the courage to go out and speak? Was it just something like, oh, this is a...
No, I was terrified.
Natural? You were terrified?
I was terrified.
Okay.
Yeah, terrified. But I forced myself to. The funny thing is, both my parents have passed, and my mother passed 5 years after my dad in 2015, and I was back in South Africa for the service, etc. I'd also just been out there a few weeks before to spend some time with her before she passed. But when I was out there for the service, and with her, both my parents had been married before, and they both had daughters, so I was with my mother's first child, and who's my stepsister, and we're very close, and we were just going through stuff, and I said, all I want is the photographs, right? You can have everything else. And so I was going through some stuff, and I got back to London, and then it must have been about 18 months later. I pulled the stuff out of the cupboard. I thought, let me go through some of the stuff and check it out, and I found these amazing photographs. But what I found in there was a little certificate that had my name on it from 1973, right? So I would have been, 66 to 73. I was like 7 years of age, right? Okay. And it said I got an A+ at a speech contest, South African speech contest, and I never even knew I had that. Wow. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. My parents never told me about this, but I was terrified to speak because I'd been told all the time. I'd be bullied all the time and told the time I was ugly and told the time that I didn't have anything to say, etc. So I just...
Dude, you're handsome, bro. You're a good-looking dude.
Oh, thanks, man.
You're a good-looking dude. What are you talking about?
But it took me a long time to come to that understanding, right? Or to be able to look in the mirror and say, hey, I dig you. But when I was younger, I just withdrew. So I didn't speak for a long time, but then when I started going to workshops, I saw these people putting their hands up, but it's only about 15% of the room in any environment, in any workshop, who actually actively engages, right? 85% are passive. Yep. They just listen.
And we do our Zoom calls. He's like, "Come on, guys, speak up. What are you getting?"
So it was. I remember going through. We talked about landmark earlier, and I was doing the advanced course, and I remember forcing my own hand up in the air. And I was terrified when my hand went up. My brain said, "What are you doing?" And then I got called on, and then I had to stand up and say something. And my legs were shaking, my palms were sweating. I was incoherent, but I did it, right? And
that's awesome.
And then I thought. Then when I sat down, eventually I thought, "Wow, that wasn't so bad, actually." And then I had a few people come to me and say to me, "Hey, thanks for sharing that." I didn't share a lot. I don't even really remember what I shared. And I remember I got some really negative feedback about that too, because another guy stood up in the room and said, "Hey, I know who you are. You're one of those white supremacists, from South Africa." And and I had to, and I stood there and I thought, wow, and I thought, hey, if I was in your shoes, I'd probably think the same thing about me. That's exactly what I said. I realized that I was afraid. I realized I was afraid to speak. And I thought that doesn't help because I was in sales. I've always been in sales, and that was impacting my sales ability. And I love selling. I've always loved selling because I like meeting people, but I had to kind of force myself, through that veil. That veil or that barrier. And so then I joined Toastmasters. And and then that was a great basic training, and then I thought, wow, this is great. And I remember thinking to myself, what would I love to do? And I remember my first landmark forum, and I thought, I want to do what that guy does. I'd love to facilitate change because by that stage I'd read so many books, and I loved the information and I loved sharing with it, and I'd share it with my friends. It would often fall on deaf ears, right? But when I joined Toastmasters, then I began to think, okay, cool, maybe I can do this, and then I got a chance to speak in London for the very first time in front of a big audience, and I was petrified. I had a suit on, and 20 years ago, the suits were very, very different to what we wear now, right? They were a lot looser. So my legs were shaking inside my suit pants, and my pants were shaking. It looked like there was a fan on me.
The air conditioner blowing.
My palms were sweating, and I remember the feedback I got afterwards. The feedback was lots of passion and excitement, no structure. Just like spaghetti bolognese on the audience. But I remember thinking, wow, I'd love to do that again, And I remember thinking that wasn't so scary. So then I started getting all this. I started doing training. And then when I joined Tony, by that stage I'd seen so many different people, and I was watching them, studying them, and I was thinking, I was watching them. And then I thought, listen, I've got to do this, right? It's now or never. So then I went back to South Africa and I launched my business. I did my very first talk. And it just,
Right. Yeah. Isn't that amazing? The thing that we fear the most is so huge. It's like David and Goliath, and you get on the other side, you're like, oh, that's all.
What you love the most, yeah.
That's
yeah,
all.
and I say that to a lot of people. I say that if you want to change your life in any area of your life, even if you have no need or no desire to be on a stage all the time, you should go on some kind of speaking course, because it teaches you how to be in front of people, right? And that's what we're afraid of the most. People are so afraid to speak out. You asked me the question about people speaking out or saying something. It's because they're afraid of what other people think of them.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm doing this podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a speech impediment as a child, so if I said a word incorrectly, my dad would hit me. So my speech impediment turned into a stuttering problem. Now what I found for me, what worked for me, is if I'm getting in front of a group of people and I have something up, if I try to hide that something up, then it's over.
Yeah.
I mean, I got to go, hey, man, I got something up. I'm terrified first time I'm doing this class. And once I speak the truth, then I'm okay.
Yeah.
But if I try to hide it, oh, my God, it's excruciating, man.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the best way to address it, actually.
Yep.
Yeah, it's
Man,
just
I am sweating like a, my legs are twitching and all kind of stuff, and just get it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And especially for men, because a lot of times we're taught to be stoic, keep our feelings on the inside, don't tell anybody what's going on because everybody's looking at you. But like you said, when I find that, especially with my girlfriend, when I'm just truthful with her how I'm feeling, sometimes the shit may hit the fan, but it gives us we can operate in truth together, in honesty, and that I find doing that, being just, hey, this is what's happening.
And when you do that, the other person feels like they can open up too,
Exactly.
right? It creates trust.
Yep.
And we all taught when we were young, right? You've heard this yourself when you were young. Boys don't cry.
Yeah.
You got to be a man. Grab your balls, be a man, or whatever.
Yeah.
That kind of all those phrases, right?
Yeah, don't cry. I'll give you something to cry for.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, God, I heard that one.
I remember I spoke. I was invited to speak at the Ministry of Defence in Manchester, England, and it was all military men, and there was a lot of brass in the room, and a lot of officers, and the conference was was military themed, obviously, and they asked me to come in and speak about my experiences, and I remember a lot of them afterwards. They said, "Wow, it's the first time somebody's ever been so open about their experience." And I said, well, that's the only way, really, right? That's how we're going to help these people. That's how we're going to help these guys, because, every single day, throughout the day, it's 22 seconds, apparently, that a veteran takes their own life. And those are just veterans, so... And men, the suicide for men has gone up over the last 20 months since lockdown. There's a lot of men have lost their income. And when a man, and a lot of men's identity is tied very, very, very tied into their money. How much money they make.
Right.
If they can't make money,
Then who?
they don't know who they really are. Their identity is taken away, and now they think I can't feed my family. There's no point in living.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why this work is important.
Absolutely.
Music, vitally important.
Absolutely.
So how long have you been internationally speaking?
Since 2000.
Since 2000,
Yeah.
20 years.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's been amazing. I've been able to go places I never ever thought I'd go, and meet people I never thought I'd meet. It's truly been a blessing. So many blessings.
And I remember when I did my first forum too, I said, I'm gonna do what that guy's doing. I'd like to do what that's guy. Man, it looked like a great job to do that. Yeah. And I went and did other things, started other companies, and did other things. But that was something. Personal growth work was always like in the back of my consciousness,
Yes.
So I've done a lot of classes, studied consciousness all over for 30 plus years.
Yeah.
And then I took things and put them together in a way that that feel good for me,
Yeah.
So that's what we're doing here. It's different.
Yeah,
really
nice.
different.
Nice.
Heavy on the feelings.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're feeling beings, aren't we?
Yes.
And we're taught not to feel
Yeah,
the
well,
earliest age.
and here's a pill to help you not. You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we tell kids that all the
Yeah.
time, right? Stop crying.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
No, if you really desire to have fun in life, drink this beer, drink this drink,
Yeah.
numb yourself out.
Absolutely.
And you had 18 years of drugs and alcohol. I had 25.
Wow.
And I started drinking when I was 13,
Wow.
so 37 years of alcohol.
Wow.
So it was, when I came out of all that too, I mean, not every day, but I could drink one or I could drink 30, you know,
Yeah.
just depending on what my mood was, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and it's also it's the reason why you're doing it, right?
yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, nowadays, you know, I can go out and have dinner and have a glass of wine, you know. I can have a beer. It doesn't bother me. You know, that doesn't bother me at all. And then I can go without having a beer for like 6 months. And it doesn't, you know, I don't need it. But I'm not, so I have some friends who are in AA and NA and they can't do that, you know, they just can't have a beer. And I understand that too, yeah. So, but yeah, well done to you, my man. It's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, we've touched on you know, feelings and how, you know, especially us as men, we've suppressed our feelings a lot. And you know, honestly, it wasn't until the last 2 years that I'm like, oh man, I wasn't even aware that I wasn't feeling. I thought I was feeling, but it was just this mental construct of what I thought feelings was. And so I know if I was going through it, I know many men are going through, you know, what it is to truly, authentically, you know, like feel. So, you know, my question is to you is just, you know, how do we move forward as men to feel in our society where the society is like, no, don't feel. Like we see it on TV shows, you know, oh, you're the guy who drinks, you're the guy who sleeps with a whole lot of women, you're the guy, that's who you're supposed to be. So how, you know, where do you see the trajectory or the avenue for us to get out of that, and how would you go about doing that for us?
Wow, that's a big question.
I know. Okay, well, just for me, like you're just talking to me.
It's what that reminds me of is what Tony says: when you heal the boy, a man appears, right? So, you know, if you look at human needs, you know, Maslow spoke about this in the hierarchy of needs, and then Tony took that model and made it easier for everyone to understand. But it really boils down to that. You know, men, we have a need for significance. We want to be acknowledged. We want to be strong. We want to achieve things. Women need to feel safe. And women can't feel, the problem with the world today is women can't really feel safe because men haven't healed. Because men are still being boys, right? And they're still looking for significance outside of themselves in unhealthy ways. You know, violence is definitely probably one of the highest because it gives you an immediate buzz, right? In terms of, you know, adrenaline.
Gotcha.
And it also gives you immediate connection with your enemy. You feel immediately connected. You know, so, and especially
That's
if
a
you
great point,
look at gang violence, right, with young kids, and we have a lot of gangs in South Africa too. And if you give a young kid a gun or a knife, and knife crime is rising in London in a big way with young kids as young as 11 and 12 carrying around big knives and, you know, stabbing each other. Why does that happen? People say, why is that happening? For one, first of all, often there's not a father figure around in that family. So there's no male role model. And if there's no father figure, there's generally no male role models in the family at large. And then, you know, so they're going to go looking for a male role model somewhere else. And they'll find them. And they're looking for significance. They're looking for acknowledgement. They're looking for connection and certainty. That's what kids are looking for. If they don't find that at home, they're going to find it somewhere else. And they'll find it in gangs. And gang culture creates a deep connection. You know, they'll die for each other. And that's deep, right? And so if you give someone a gun or a knife and they put it to someone else's head and that person gives them 100% attention, that's what they're looking for. That's addictive, right?
That's
yeah. So
that's new.
And you know, we as men we want significance, so we got to find healthy ways to get that. But a lot of men, it comes back to identity. A lot of men have not really been able to, they're not been encouraged to find out who they really are and really connect with that deeper part of themselves. You know, you spoke about co-creation. It's really understanding that actually you're not your body. You're not your name, you know, you're not your vocation, you're not any of that stuff. You are something that exists inside of this body that's connected to everything else. And, you know, when you have that sense of identity or when you feel comfortable in your own skin, it's okay to be able to cry. If you look, I just watched the James Bond movie, right? The latest James Bond movie.
Was it good?
Very good.
Awesome.
And the character Bond, he comes very, very close to showing I mean, he's really good, Daniel Craig. I think he's been the best Bond, apart from Sean Connery, perhaps. However, he comes very close to showing his true feelings, but then he quickly masks them. You know, now had he been allowed to cry, you know, as the character Bond, maybe we could see his tears, and he really expressed himself, even just for a short period of time. You know, that's a message. It's okay for a strong man, for a powerful man, to be vulnerable and to just express himself and to feel what he's feeling rather than bottle it up. Because that's happening on screen all the time, isn't it?
Right, yes.
You know, we're just showing that all the time, that men are just strong all the time. You can't be strong all the time. It's impossible. You're going to run out of energy. You know, eventually you're going to break. And then when you break, you're going to take it out on the people around you. And that's going to be your kids, your wife, you know, your friends, or whatever, or a stranger in the street. So, yeah, it's a very interesting time, because what's happening right now is you see a lot of men are being feminized, you know, and you know, that's not healthy, man.
Right.
That's not healthy at all. You know, boys need to be initiated into manhood.
I absolutely agree.
That's
with
what
that.
happened in the indigenous cultures. There's always an initiation.
Absolutely.
process. You know, women's initiation, they go through childbirth.
Yeah.
You know, that's when they initiate. That's when they go through that pain and put something outside themselves and find something deep inside themselves that they, you know, we don't have as men. You know. And
100%.
most men would initiate themselves by going to war, and that's what created, you know, go to war, boy, and come back a man, but with a lot of issues, you know.
I went to boarding school, and that was one of the things that I'm grateful for. However, people always say to me, would you send your kids to boarding school? And I didn't send my kids to boarding school because of all the stuff that you just mentioned. You come back with a lot of other stuff. You know, that's not cool. But I'm grateful, and I have trained myself to look for the blessings and everything. So, you know, one of the blessings of boarding school and the military was it really made me who I am. You know, you know, I had to learn how to stand on my own feet. I had to learn how to, you know, defend myself and look after myself, and also I had to learn how to connect with people. People from different backgrounds, different belief systems, different cultures. You know, I found myself in the military with people who had never worn shoes before, ever. You know, and yet they were, you know, they always carried a Bible, and they were like extremely racist. You know, so. You know, the initiation is an important thing for young boys, and like you say, quite rightly, women, they have their own initiation, and at the same time, you know, women, the world's changed for them too in drastic ways. So, yeah, this is a discussion we could have for days, really.
It's kind of like flopped.
Yeah.
You know, like now women are trying to be more masculine.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of.
Well, in a lot of ways, they've had to be.
Yes.
Yeah, because. But at the same time, I think also you can take that to the extreme, you know, where that will, you know, affect your relationship with a man if you're a woman, because then polarity is important in a relationship. If you've got no polarity, there's no attraction.
Right.
So you need feminine and masculine.
Yep.
You know, you need yin and yang. You can't have masculine. Yeah, even in gay relationships, there's going to be a feminine and a masculine.
True.
Because you need the polarity for connection. But it's a very interesting time we're living in now, and. You know, men, and what's great about the time we're living in right now, especially over the last 5 years, there's a lot of men's groups that have opened up and started up. You know, there's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of groups that are for men, where the men can really connect with themselves and really, you know, perhaps take themselves to places emotionally that have never been before, which is great. But there's not enough.
Yeah. Do you have any suggestions? You know.
There's a few friends of mine that run some in the UK and Europe and that, and I'm just trying to think of their names now. But it's easy enough to find that.
Right.
Yeah. And I know there's that kind of thing is happening in America too.
Yep.
Yeah. There's in Texas. There's one, Sacred Sons. If you're, you know, watching or whatever, Sacred Sons, check them out.
Yeah.
They implement a lot of or integrate a lot of indigenous culture and games, and just, you know, they wrestle, you know, and it's like that positive camaraderie and just
I think one of the
healing.
most powerful things about those groups is that they do get together, and then they sit in circles, and then they encourage each other to talk about what's on their heart, or what's in the back of their mind that they've never spoken about with anyone else, or that they're most afraid of. And I do that in my workshop too. I get people to talk. I get people to really think about the thing that they're most embarrassed about, or that they're most ashamed of, because shame is the lowest vibrating emotion, and
Yep.
that causes the most problems, for human beings. Shame. We all carry shame from our youth, all of us, every single one of us, without even realizing it.
Yep.
And different levels of shame,
Yep.
because we've all had different levels of trauma.
Yeah.
Trauma creates that. There's very severe trauma, and then there's very subtle trauma, but we've all had it.
Right.
And so that shame is what prevents us from really connecting with who we really are, and then connecting with other people.
Yeah.
And so I love the fact that more and more men are finding their way to groups, and then they're sitting in circles and they're talking about the things they're ashamed of in their lives, and they without any judgment, which is great.
Yep. And once what have we found? Once they move through that shame, once they can speak about it, then it becomes what they're most proud of talking about.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it goes from shame to pride,
Absolutely.
like that. So transformative.
Yeah, for sure. Because then they see it as it's a way to inspire other people to realize that actually, wow, you know what, I don't have to hide what I'm hiding. You know, because we didn't really do anything wrong when we were kids. We were just being kids.
Right.
Yep.
But we've brought up in this right and wrong culture,
Well,
or
that's
this
a
right
big
and wrong
one.
model of what's right and wrong. If it's not, if your parents don't like it, it goes in the wrong box. You know, but they just got that from their parents. They got it from their parents.
Yep.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yep. This shame, blame, guilt, and hate, that's what keeps everyone stuck in that pattern. That pattern will continue to repeat until they can drop that and be able to see the lesson in it.
Yeah.
Until they do that, they're just stuck in the hamster wheel of that
Yeah,
again and
absolutely.
again and again.
Yeah. Are you familiar with David Hawkins' work?
Yeah,
Power versus Force.
Yeah, I read Power versus Force.
Yeah, and some of the other books. Great work. Eh?
Yeah, what's the other one I read?
The one about surrender. What's that one called?
Yeah, I've read 2 of his books. I choose to remember.
Yeah. But the only reason I brought him up, I'll mention him, is because he created that map of consciousness, which is such a powerful map. Yeah.
Yep, and then I read all Neil Donald Walsh's stuff, whatever, 30 years ago, 25 years ago, whatever it was, a long time ago.
Nice.
Gary Zukav.
Yeah, I like him. Yeah.
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 And that was one of the early books I read that got me into it, and Napoleon Hill
Yes.
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
Neville Goddard, he's one of my favorites.
Who's that?
Neville Goddard.
Oh, Neville.
Neville.
Yeah.
The Mystic. The previous podcast we were talking about how, writing down like your goals or whatever right before you go to sleep, and then your consciousness.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So that's where I learned that one from.
Yeah.
It was great stuff.
Yeah, that's so true. You know what I used to do when I was, without even realizing I was doing it. When we first had the very first Sony Walkmans, and I would go to sleep listening to something on my earphones, and then wake up in the morning and it was still playing. Because it used to just, the cassette would. You remember, you used to be able to get those particular ones when it got to the end of the cassette, it would just play the other side.
Yeah.
And it would just play all night while I was listening to it.
Right.
And I did that for years and years and years. Yeah.
One of my favorite things to do to help reprogram my way of thinking is I'll record my own decrees and affirmations. And
In your own voice?
Yeah, in my own
I
voice.
do that too.
And I'll listen to it just like you were
That's so
saying right
cool.
before I go to bed. Oh, and you wake up, you're like, wow.
Yeah.
Like I felt like I coached myself the whole night.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think
You do that,
I
that's
don't
cool.
think I don't think there's a night that I haven't gone to sleep in the last 30 years without listening to something. Yeah, as I fall asleep. It's such an important thing.
You mentioned her. What was her
Yeah,
name?
I need Florence Scovel Shin.
Yeah, that was her.
And I heard
in
you.
my head.
Oh,
Thank
no,
you.
thank you.
Yeah, I like her too.
Yep.
Good evening. Yeah, she's awesome.
Yeah,
And
Okay.
for me, I'm lucid in my dream state quite frequently, so I just do decrees during my dream state. I've got myself where I can just do them while I'm asleep.
wow.
So
Jedi.
I'm aware I'm asleep, and so I'll just start talking. And
Wow, that's awesome.
yeah, it's fun,
Wow, that's so cool.
especially if I'm going to lead a class. If I'm leading a class, I'll do those all night,
Yeah.
And golly, it's
Yeah, the very first time I ever did my own workshop, right, in South Africa, and I'd prepared this 3-day workshop, and I was for 72 hours, 3 days without sleep. I sat in my office and I just read through the script, and I read through what I was going to say, when I was going to say it, I had the time and everything. I just read it over and over and over. My wife, my ex-wife now, she kept coming down and saying, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I'll just be reading this stuff. I said, I'm preparing, I'm just getting it into my consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so you just very similar to what you do when you're lying
Yeah.
in your sleep state. Yeah.
I do it in my sleep state. And one of the things that, when we're in classes, our classes are generally pretty small,
Yeah.
30, 40, 30, 40, 50 people, and they're all experiential.
Yeah.
And, in that size of a class, everyone participates. I mean, we'll say, here's how you do it. If you don't participate, I'm going to be calling on you.
Yeah.
What are you getting out of the class? Because I've read something, a master can explain something 1,000 different ways. So when somebody has information, when they receive information, they got to be able to speak it back in their own words, not
Yes.
just regurgitate and quote. But what are you getting? How are you applying it to your life? What ahas are you getting? And got to be able to talk. Got to be able to get it out. And once they can hear their own voice saying it, and most people don't, like I said, don't have a clue what they're going to say. Raise your hand, do it anyway. I'm going to call on you. You're going to do it no matter what, because when somebody pays for a class, to me, it's a spiritual contract. I'm investing this much money with you in order to produce this results in my life. So it doesn't matter whether you like me or I like you, but we're going to produce that spiritual contract, that result. Period.
Yeah. And you're both going to win.
Huh?
You both win too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But the person's got to get those voices out and be able to speak through them, because that voice of shame inside of them won't let them speak that.
Yeah.
So they got to go through that voice of shame in the class. You know?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, I also keep my classes quite small too. It's nice that way, because then everybody gets to participate, like you say, and it's more intimate, But isn't there something amazing about when you see people actually finding their voice, right, for the first time, and then you can literally see them transform, and you see all that tension that was in their muscles, and it disappears, drops away, and they just like literally lose 5 or 10 years right in front of you.
Yep.
Such a beautiful thing.
And all of a sudden, they're behind their eyes.
Yeah.
It's fun.
The twinkle, the spark in their eye.
Tone of voice changes. I mean,
Yeah.
and then they go home and go, oh my God, my husband changed, my kids changed. Yeah, you changed, and that changed everyone in your family,
Absolutely.
Yep.
100%. So my takeaway from this, actually, let's go. What is your takeaway? Like from what our experience is hanging out with us, for the last hour or so. What is your takeaway?
Thank you for asking that question. Well, it just reminds me that there's so many great people doing great things, and we don't hear about that because all we see is negativity, right? And so I don't watch the news. I don't listen to anything like that. I try not to see any of that stuff online. And it just reminds me that there's so many good people out there doing good things.
Yes.
And it's been great spending time with you guys. So thank you very much for having me here.
No, excellent. Thank you. And Mark?
Yeah, same thing. I appreciate you hearing, sharing the stories about people who you were in war with, and how all those things are healing. And the division we're having in the world is more leadership creating division than it actually is the people on the planet with division toward each other, unless they've been programmed to hate each other or fight each other or whatever. And that, since you're such a global scale, we have some as well, but you're playing with different global people, and to hear that everyone's starting to come together as a humanity.
I agree.
I mean, that's huge. The Great Awakening, the great apocalypse, the revealing of what's going on, and I believe at some point in time, in the very near future, everyone's going to start having appreciation, gratitude, and respect and reverence for life, and then all this stuff's going to cease to exist. Like nothing can live. All those old patterns can't live in this new way that we're bringing forth.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Nice. It's a great vision to hold.
Yeah. My takeaway is, for whatever reason, when you brought up, like with the gangs and the knife, and that's how those young men are trying to connect. I'm like, that's what I'm getting out of it. It's just like, wow, we want to connect basically with ourselves so much we're willing to kill over it, and how important connecting and finding our identity, how important that is, and how we find our value in connecting with ourselves. So, it speaks to me. It's just like, dude, if you're gonna speak out, connect with yourself. It's okay to connect with yourself. And so, and then when I do that, then my voice will be heard, and then my voice will echo, and I'll be able to shake and transform my world and my people. And so thank you for that. For whatever connection, just Like, all right, connect with yourself, Boone.
Nice.
I love you. So thank you. Thank
Oh,
you.
Thank you, man.
And yeah, man, this is good.
Yep.
Like the last time we said in the last class or the last podcast, it's just amazing to see us men in leadership coming together and create a community. So
Yeah.
this is awesome, man. This is great.
Absolutely.
Thank
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Cheers, man.
Go.
Appreciate it.
Cheers.
Yep.
Oh, that's how we can end it. We'll say cheers, everybody. Cheers. No, cheers.
Cheers.
Good luck,
No,
Mike.
okay. We'll keep working on that. We'll keep working on it.
Good luck, Mike.